The morning Amelia Hartwell vanished from Blackwood Hall, the sky over Yorkshire hung low and grey, as though the weather itself understood that something irrevocable was about to occur. She had risen before the servants, dressed without assistance, and packed a single worn leather travelling case with the few belongings she could not bear to leave behind. The rest of her life remained behind her in that great house, folded into drawers and cupboards, waiting for a mistress who would never return. She paused at the door of the nursery, her hand resting against the wooden frame. Inside, the soft breathing of a sleeping child barely disturbed the stillness. Amelia did not enter. She could not trust herself to leave if she did. Instead, she pressed her palm flat against the door, closed her eyes, and allowed herself one final moment of silent farewell. Then she turned and walked down the servants' staircase, through the still dark kitchen, and out into the cold air before dawn had fully broken over the moors. The carriage she had arranged waited beyond the gates, where the trees would conceal it from any early rising servant who happened to glance from a window. The driver, a man from the village who had been paid well enough to ask no questions, loaded her case without comment. Amelia climbed inside, drew the curtains closed, and did not look back as the horses began to move. She travelled south for several days, changing coaches in towns where no one recognized her, using a name that belonged to a dead woman. She spoke little, ate less, and slept in small inns where the floors creaked and the wind found its way through the window frames. Each mile that carried her farther from Yorkshire should have brought relief, but instead she felt only a cold, expanding emptiness, as though she had left some essential part of herself behind in that house on the moors. It was not until she reached the outskirts of Bath, where the air smelled of damp stone and coal smoke, that she finally allowed herself to open the small leather writing case she had carried with her. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, folded and sealed with wax. She had written the letter 3 days before, sitting at the desk in her sitting room, while the rest of the household slept. The words had come slowly, each one drawn from some deep place inside her that she had not known existed. Now, in a cramped room overlooking a narrow street, she read the words once more, though she already knew them by heart. They were not enough. They would never be enough. But they were all she could give him. The Duke of Ashworth would receive her letter in a few days, once she had arranged for it to be delivered from London. By then, she would have disappeared into the teeming streets of Bath, another anonymous woman among thousands, a governess without references, a widow without a husband, a woman with no past and no future worth speaking of. She had done what she believed was necessary. She had protected the only person who mattered. And if the cost of that protection was the destruction of her own heart, then so be it. She had learned long ago that hearts could be broken and still continue beating. The body endured even when the spirit did not. Amelia folded the letter and returned it to the writing case. She would post it tomorrow, and then she would begin the work of forgetting. She did not know yet how impossible that work would prove to be. The letter arrived at Blackwood Hall on a morning of unusual warmth, a temporary reprieve from the chill that had gripped the moors for weeks. James Harrington, Duke of Ashworth, was at breakfast in the small dining room when his butler entered with the silver tray and the single letter upon it. It was not the letter itself that caught his attention first, but the expression on Whitmore's face. The old butler had served the family for nearly 40 years, and his features rarely betrayed anything beyond polite attention. This morning, however, there was something hesitant in the way he held the tray, as though the envelope resting upon it might burn his fingers. "Your Grace, this arrived with the morning post. It was delivered by a messenger from London, not the regular courier." James set down his coffee and took the letter. He did not recognize the handwriting on the address, but something in the careful, deliberate strokes made his chest tighten. He waited until Whitmore had withdrawn before breaking the seal and unfolding the single sheet of paper. The letter was dated more than a week earlier, though it had only just reached him. The words were written in a steady hand, but he could see places where the ink had smudged, as though the writer had paused, or wept, or both. "My dear James, by the time you read this, I will be gone from Blackwood Hall, and you will have discovered that I am not the woman you believed me to be. I owe you an explanation, though I know that no explanation can undo the wrong I have done you. I can only ask that you believe the words I am about to write, and that you do not search for me. I came to your household under false pretenses. The name I gave, the history I told, The very position I accepted in your household, all of it was constructed to protect a secret that was never mine alone to reveal. I am not Amelia Hartwell. That woman died 3 years ago, and I took her name because I had no choice. My true name belongs to a life that was lost, and to a family that would have been destroyed if the truth had been known. I know you will demand to know the truth. I know you will send men to find me, and I know that your anger will drive you to uncover what I have hidden. But I beg you, James, do not do this. Do not search for me. Do not try to discover who I really am. The secret I carry is not mine to reveal, and if it were known, it would destroy more lives than my own. I left to protect you, and I left to protect the child. You will ask what child, and I cannot tell you. I can only say that the little girl who has lived in your nursery these past months is not a servant's daughter, and she is not the orphan I claimed her to be. She is everything to me. She is the reason I came to you, and she is the reason I must leave. I know you will feel betrayed. I know you will feel that everything between us was built on deception. I cannot argue that it was not. But I can tell you this, the feelings I expressed to you were real. The woman who walked with you through the gardens, who sat beside you at dinner, who listened to your stories of your late wife and your lost son, that woman was real. The love I felt was real. The love I still feel is real, and it will remain with me for the rest of my life. But love cannot overcome the truth of what I am, and what I am would destroy you if you knew. So I am leaving, James. I am taking the child, and I am going somewhere no one will find us. I will not tell you where. I will not contact you again. I will become another woman in another place, and I will raise her in safety, and I will try to forget that I ever knew what it meant to be loved by you. Please do not look for us. Please let us go. I remain, always and forever, your loving Amelia. James read the letter 3 times before he set it down. His hands were steady, but inside him something had begun to crack, a fissure spreading through the careful walls he had built around his heart since the death of his wife and son. He had not intended to love again. He had not believed himself capable of it. And then Amelia Hartwell had arrived at his door, a young widow with a small child, seeking a position as housekeeper, and everything had changed. Now he understood that even her arrival had been a lie. The widow's story, the references she had provided, the modest competence that had so impressed his household, all of it had been constructed. She had come to him under false pretenses, and he had welcomed her into his home, into his confidence, into his heart. He should have been furious. He should have ordered his horse saddled and ridden to the nearest magistrate and demanded that the woman be found and brought to justice. He was a duke, after all. His resources were considerable. Finding a woman and a child who had fled into the country would not be impossible for a man of his station. But he did none of those things. Instead, he sat at his breakfast table, the letter open before him, and felt something he had not expected. It was not anger that filled him, though anger was certainly present. It was not even betrayal, though that too was there. What he felt most strongly, in the cold light of that spring morning, was fear. Not fear for himself, or for his reputation, or for what society would say when it learned that the Duke of Ashworth's housekeeper had vanished with a child and a secret. What he felt was fear for her, for Amelia, for the woman who had looked at him with such sadness in her eyes, who had held his hand one evening in the library and told him that she wished things could be different, who had wept silently at his wife's grave, as though mourning someone she had never known. He had known something was wrong. He had sensed it for weeks, perhaps months, the way she sometimes went silent in the middle of a conversation, as though listening for something no one else could hear, the way she flinched when a stranger came to the house, the way she watched the road from the nursery window, as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. He had asked her once, in the quiet of the garden, whether there was something she wished to tell him. She had looked at him with those grey eyes that held so much more than she ever said, and for a moment he had thought she might finally speak. But then she had smiled, that small, sad smile that never quite reached her eyes, and told him that she was only tired. He should have pressed her. He should have demanded the truth. But he had been afraid too, afraid of what she might say, afraid that the fragile happiness they had been building might shatter if he pushed too hard. So he had said nothing, and now she was gone, and the truth was worse than anything he could have imagined. She had lied to him. She had come to his home with a false name and a false history. She had brought a child who was not what he had been told. And she had left him with a letter that raised more questions than it answered. What secret was so terrible that she could not reveal it even to him? What danger was she fleeing? Who was the child, and why did she need protection so desperately that Amelia had been willing to sacrifice everything to provide it? And what, in God's name, did she mean when she said that the woman named Amelia Hartwell had died 3 years ago? The search began quietly, as James knew it must. He could not send constables after her without raising questions he was not prepared to answer. Instead, he summoned his steward, a man named Hawkins who had served the family since before James himself was born, and told him only that Miss Hartwell had been called away suddenly by a family emergency, and that he wished to know where she had gone. Hawkins, who was old enough to know when his master was not telling him the whole truth, simply nodded and said that he would make inquiries. James watched him go, then returned to the letter and read it again. "The secret I carry is not mine to reveal, and if it were known, it would destroy more lives than my own." Those words troubled him more than any others in the letter. She had not said that the secret would destroy her life, though she had certainly implied that. She had said it would destroy more lives, multiple lives, the lives of others, perhaps even his own. He thought about the child, a little girl of perhaps 4 years old, with dark curls and serious dark eyes that seemed to see more than a child should. Her name, according to Amelia, was Rose Hartwell. But if Amelia's name was false, then the child's name might also be false. And if the child's name was false, then everything about her, her parentage, her history, her very identity, was also in question. Who was Rose? Why had Amelia brought her to Blackwood Hall? And why was it so important that no one discover the truth about her? James spent the rest of that day in his study, ostensibly attending to estate business. In reality, he did little more than sit at his desk, staring at the letter and turning over possibilities in his mind. He was a logical man, a man who had always believed in the power of reason and evidence to reveal truth. But the truth here was elusive, hidden somewhere in the shadows of Amelia's carefully constructed past. By evening, he had made his first decision. He would not report Amelia's disappearance to the authorities. He would not make a public matter of it. But he would find her, and he would learn the truth, whether she wished him to or not. He could not let her go. He could not simply accept the letter and move on with his life as though she had never existed. She had asked him not to search for her, but she must have known that he would. She must have known that a man like him, a man who had lost his wife and son, and then found love again in the most unexpected circumstances, would not simply let that love walk away without a fight. Unless, of course, that was exactly what she had wanted. Unless the letter was not a plea but a challenge, a way of telling him that the truth was more dangerous than he could imagine, and that he would be wise to stay away. James Harrington had never been a wise man when it came to matters of the heart. He had married his first wife against the advice of his family, and he had loved her with a devotion that had surprised even himself. When she had died, along with their infant son, he had believed that the capacity for love had died with them. Amelia Hartwell had proven him wrong. Now she was gone, and he was left with nothing but a letter and a determination that grew stronger with each passing hour. He would find her. He would learn the truth. And then, whatever that truth might be, he would bring her home. The first clue came from the village. Hawkins returned 2 days later with news that a woman fitting Amelia's description had been seen boarding a southbound coach on the morning of her disappearance. She had been alone, carrying a single traveling case, and she had paid in coins rather than notes. The driver remembered her, because she had not spoken a word during the entire journey to the coaching inn, where she had changed to a London-bound service. "She did not take the child, Your Grace," Hawkins said, watching James carefully. "The little girl was still in the nursery that morning, as far as the servants can determine. It was not until afternoon that anyone realized Miss Hartwell had left, and by then the child was already gone as well. It seems they left separately." James frowned. How could that be? The child could not have left the house alone. "No, Your Grace. But there is a footman, a young man named Thomas, who has not been seen since that same morning. The servants assumed he had been sent on an errand, but he never returned. It is possible he escorted the child somewhere to meet Miss Hartwell. James felt a cold anger begin to stir. A footman, one of his own servants, had helped her. How long had this been planned? How many people in his own household had known what she intended? "Find out everything you can about this footman," he said. "Where he came from, who recommended him, any friends or family he might have. I want to know if he has been in contact with anyone since he left." Hawkins nodded and withdrew. James returned to the window and stared out at the moors. The weather had turned again, and a cold rain was falling, driven by a wind that moaned around the corners of the house. Somewhere out there, Amelia was traveling through this same storm, moving farther away from him with every hour that passed. But she had made a mistake. She had left the child in the nursery until after she herself had gone, which meant she had needed help to get the child out. That help had come from the footman, Thomas, and if Thomas could be found, perhaps he could lead James to Amelia. It was a thin thread, but it was something, and James Harrington was not the sort of man to let a thread go unpulled. He spent the next several days gathering information. The footman, Thomas, had come to Blackwood Hall some 8 months earlier, shortly before Amelia herself had arrived. He had been recommended by a merchant in Leeds, a man who dealt in wool and had occasional business with the estate. When James contacted the merchant, he learned that the recommendation had been a forgery. The real merchant had never heard of Thomas, and had certainly never recommended anyone for service at Blackwood Hall. The discovery raised more questions. If Thomas had not been recommended by the Leeds merchant, then how had he obtained the letter of recommendation? And why had he been so eager to work at Blackwood Hall, a remote estate in the Yorkshire moors, when there were certainly easier and better paid positions available in Leeds or London? The answer, James realized, was sitting in the nursery. Thomas had not come to Blackwood Hall for the position. He had come for the child, and Amelia had come for the same reason. But that made no sense. If Amelia had come to Blackwood Hall specifically to be near the child, then the child must have some connection to the estate, or to James himself. Yet he had never seen the child before she arrived. She was not the child of any of his relatives, as far as he knew. She was not the child of any of his tenants or servants. Unless, of course, everything he thought he knew about the child was wrong. The housekeeper who had served Blackwood Hall before Amelia's arrival was a woman named Mrs. Whitfield, a widow of some 60 years, who had retired to live with her daughter in York. James had always trusted her judgment, and it was Mrs. Whitfield who had interviewed Amelia and recommended her for the position. Now, looking back, he wondered how much Mrs. Whitfield had known. He wrote to her in York, asking if she would be willing to speak with him about Miss Hartwell. The reply came quickly, and James travelled to York himself, rather than risk the delay of further correspondence. The journey took the better part of a day, and by the time he arrived at the small, tidy house where Mrs. Whitfield lived with her daughter's family, he was tired and impatient. Mrs. Whitfield received him in the parlour, her expression wary. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a quiet manner, and she had always struck James as someone who noticed more than she revealed. Now, as she poured tea with steady hands, he wondered whether she had noticed more about Amelia than she had ever admitted. "You wish to ask me about Miss Hartwell," she said when the tea had been served. "I wondered when you would come." James set down his cup. "Then you knew something was wrong." "I knew she was not what she appeared to be," Mrs. Whitfield said carefully. "She was too well-spoken for the widow of a country doctor. She knew too much about fine houses, about the way things are done among the gentry, and she was frightened, Your Grace. Frightened of something, though she never spoke of it. Did you ever ask her about it?" "Once. She told me that she had left her old life behind, and that she did not wish to speak of it. I respected her wishes. She was a good worker, and she was kind to the child, and I thought that whatever her past might be, she deserved a chance to build a new life." James leaned forward. "The child. What do you know about the child?" Mrs. Whitfield's expression shifted, and for a moment, James saw something like sorrow in her eyes. "I know that Miss Hartwell loved her more than anything in the world. I know that she would have died to protect her, and I know that she was not her mother." The words landed like stones in the quiet room. James had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made the truth somehow more real, more immediate. "How do you know this?" "Because I saw the way she looked at the child when she thought no one was watching. It was not the look of a mother, it was the look of a woman who had been given a sacred trust, and who feared she might fail. There is a difference, Your Grace. I have seen both. James sat back in his chair. If Amelia was not the child's mother, then who was? And why had she claimed the child as her own? What possible reason could there be for a woman to pass off another woman's child as hers? Unless, of course, the child's true identity was the secret she had been protecting. He thought about the letter again, about the words she had written. She is everything to me. She is the reason I came to you, and she is the reason I must leave. The child was the key. Everything else, the false name, the false history, the careful construction of Amelia's new identity, was secondary. The child was what mattered. The child was what Amelia had been protecting all along. But from what? And from whom? The investigation continued through the spring and into the summer. James hired men to trace the footman, Thomas, and to search for any sign of Amelia and the child. The reports that came back were frustratingly incomplete. Thomas had vanished completely, and despite every effort to find him, James never discovered who had sent him. A woman matching Amelia's description had been seen in Leeds, then in Birmingham, and finally in a small village outside Bath. But each sighting was less certain than the last, and by midsummer, the trail had gone cold. James did not give up. He could not. The memory of Amelia was too vivid, too present in every corner of Blackwood Hall. He saw her in the garden where they had walked together, in the library where she had sat reading in the evenings, in the nursery where she had sung the child to sleep. He heard her voice in the quiet moments before dawn, when the house was still and the weight of his loss pressed down upon him. His friends urged him to move on. His family suggested that he find a suitable wife, a woman of his own class who could give him heirs and restore some sense of normalcy to his life. James listened to their advice and ignored it entirely. He was not interested in finding a suitable wife. He was interested in finding Amelia Hartwell, and until he did, there would be no moving on. It was in August, nearly 5 months after her disappearance, that the first real breakthrough came. A man in Bath, a lodging house keeper by the name of Mr. Perkins, wrote to say that a woman matching Amelia's description had rented rooms from him in the early spring. She had given her name as Mrs. Collins, a widow, and she had been accompanied by a small child. They had stayed for several weeks before moving on. The letter was not much, but it was something. More than anything else James had received in months. He wrote back immediately, asking for any details the man could provide. What had the woman looked like? How had she behaved? Where had she gone when she left? The reply, when it came, confirmed his hopes. The woman was in her late 20s, with grey eyes and dark hair, and she spoke with a northern accent that she tried to hide. She had been quiet, polite, and had kept mostly to herself. The child, a girl of perhaps 5 years old, had been well behaved and had rarely left the lodging house. When they had left, the woman had told Mr. Perkins that they were going to Bristol, where she hoped to find work. Bristol, a port city, busy and anonymous, where a woman with a false name and a child could easily disappear, but also a city where a determined man with resources and patience might eventually find her. James made arrangements to travel to Bristol himself. He told his household only that he was going to London on business, and he left instructions that any letters should be held until his return. Then he set out, taking with him only a small valise and the letter from Amelia, which he had read so many times that the paper had begun to soften at the folds. The journey took several days, and James spent most of it staring out the window of the carriage, watching the familiar landscape of Yorkshire give way to the rolling hills of the Midlands, and then to the softer, greener countryside of the south. Each mile carried him farther from everything he knew, but he did not hesitate. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. Whatever truth awaited him, he would learn it. He could only hope that when he finally found Amelia, she would not send him away. Bristol in late summer was a city of noise and movement, of ships coming and going from the harbour, of merchants and sailors and labourers filling the streets from dawn until dusk. James took rooms at a respectable hotel near the centre of the city and began his search. He had no photograph of Amelia, no description beyond his own memory, and no guarantee that she had even remained in Bristol after leaving Bath. But he had his instincts, and he had the determination of a man who had spent 5 months doing nothing but thinking about the woman he had lost. For the first several days, he simply walked. He walked through the markets and the residential streets, through the neighborhoods where lodging houses crowded together and where a woman could rent a room without drawing attention. He watched for gray eyes and dark hair, for a child with dark curls, for the particular way Amelia held herself, straight-backed and watchful, as though she expected danger around every corner. He did not find her, but he did not give up. It was on the 6th day that he saw the child. He was walking through a small park near the edge of the city, not far from the harbor, when he heard a child's laugh. It was not the laugh itself that stopped him, but the way it sounded, bright and clear, like a bell ringing through the afternoon air. He turned, and there she was, a little girl with dark curls, playing with a ball on the grass, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. For a moment, James could not breathe. The child was older than when he had last seen her, taller and more confident, but there was no mistaking those dark eyes, that serious expression that could transform so quickly into joy. It was Rose. He was certain of it. He did not approach. Instead, he found a bench in the shade and sat down, watching as the child played. A woman sat nearby on a blanket, her attention fixed on some needlework in her lap. She was older than Amelia, her hair graying, and James did not recognize her. A nursemaid, perhaps, or a companion, someone Amelia had hired to help care for the child. For nearly an hour, James sat and watched. The child played with her ball, occasionally calling out to the woman, who would look up and smile and return to her needlework. The scene was peaceful, almost idyllic, and yet James felt a growing tension in his chest. If the child was here, then Amelia could not be far away. And yet where was she? Why was she not here with the child? He waited until the woman began to gather up the blanket and the child's toys, then rose and followed at a distance. They walked through the streets, the child skipping beside the woman, and eventually came to a modest house on a quiet side street. The woman unlocked the door and went inside with the child, closing the door behind them. James stood across the street, staring at the house. It was small but well kept, with clean curtains in the windows and a pot of flowers beside the door. It was the kind of house a woman of limited means might rent, respectable, but anonymous, the sort of place where no one asked questions. He waited until evening, but Amelia did not appear. He returned the next day, and the next, watching the house from a distance, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. The woman came and went, sometimes with the child, sometimes alone, but of Amelia there was no sign. By the 4th day, James had begun to fear that something had happened to her. Perhaps she had left Bristol, leaving the child with a hired nurse, while she went elsewhere to find work. Or perhaps she was ill, confined to a room somewhere, unable to come to the child. Or perhaps, and this thought troubled him most, she had been taken, forced to flee once again, leaving the child behind in the care of a stranger. He could not wait any longer. On the 5th day, when the woman emerged from the house alone, James crossed the street and approached her. "Forgive me," he said, touching his hat. "I am looking for a woman named Amelia Hartwell. I have reason to believe she may be staying here." The woman's face went pale. She glanced back at the house, then at James, and he saw fear in her eyes. "I don't know anyone by that name," she said quickly. "You must be mistaken." "I am not mistaken," James said quietly. "I have seen the child in the park. Her name is Rose. The woman I am looking for has been caring for her. Please, I am not here to cause trouble. I only want to speak with her." The woman hesitated. She was clearly frightened, but something in James's expression seemed to reassure her, or at least to make her uncertain. "She is not here," she said finally. "She left several weeks ago. I don't know where she went." "Left? But the child? The child is with me. She asked me to care for her while she was away. She said she would return, but she has not sent word." The woman's voice trembled. "I don't know what to do. I've been waiting, hoping she would come back, but—" She broke off, and James saw that she was close to tears. He reached out and took her arm, steadying her. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." Her name was Mrs. Blake, and she was a widow who had been taking in laundry to support herself. Amelia had come to her, not long after arriving in Bristol, looking for someone who could help with the child while she worked. Mrs. Blake had agreed, and over the following weeks, she had come to know Amelia as a quiet, kind woman who loved the child fiercely and who seemed to carry a heavy burden. She would come in the evenings to take the child home, Mrs. Blake said. They were sitting in her small parlor now, the child playing in the next room. Some nights she would stay and talk. I think she was lonely. She never spoke of her past, but I could see that she was running from something, or someone. Did she ever mention anyone by name? Anyone who might have wished her harm? Mrs. Blake shook her head. No, she was very careful about what she said, but I could see the fear in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. And then, about 3 weeks ago, she came to me in the evening and said that she had to go away for a time. She asked me to keep the child until she returned. She gave me money and told me to tell no one about her. Did she say why she was leaving, or where she was going? No. She only said that it was safer if she went alone, and that she would send word as soon as she could. Mrs. Blake paused, her eyes filling with tears. But she has not sent word. I have been so worried. The money she left is nearly gone, and I don't know what to do. I've been considering whether I should go to the authorities, but she begged me not to. She said it would put the child in danger. James sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Amelia had left the child with Mrs. Blake and gone somewhere alone. That could only mean that whatever danger she had been fleeing had finally caught up with her. She had left to draw it away from the child, to face it alone, rather than risk the child being caught in the crossfire. But what was the danger? Who was pursuing her? And where had she gone? He thought about the letter again, about the words she had written. The secret I carry is not mine to reveal, and if it were known, it would destroy more lives than my own. What secret could possibly be so dangerous that she would abandon the child she loved to face it alone? Mrs. Blake, he said slowly, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer truthfully. Do you know anything about the child's parentage? Who her mother is? Her father? Mrs. Blake hesitated. She told me the child's mother was dead, that she had promised to care for the child when the mother passed. That's all she ever said. But she told you nothing more? No names? No details? No. Mrs. Blake shook her head. But I will tell you this, sir. That child is not a common child. She speaks like a lady's daughter. She knows her letters already. And her manners are perfect. She has been taught by someone who knew how to raise a gentlewoman. James nodded slowly. He had noticed the same thing himself. During the months when Amelia and Rose had lived at Blackwood Hall, the child had seemed out of place among the servants' children, quiet and watchful, with a gravity that belied her age. I will find Amelia, he said. I will discover what has happened to her. But until then, I ask you to continue caring for the child. I will provide whatever money you need, and I will make arrangements for your protection. You have my word that no harm will come to either of you. Mrs. Blake looked at him with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Who are you, sir? You speak as though you have the power to make such promises. James hesitated. He had not intended to reveal his identity, at least not yet, but he could see that Mrs. Blake needed reassurance, and he could not provide it while hiding behind anonymity. My name is James Harrington, he said quietly. I am the Duke of Ashworth. Mrs. Blake's eyes widened. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly lowered herself into a curtsy. Your Grace, she whispered. Forgive me. I did not know. There is nothing to forgive. James raised a hand to stop her. Please, sit down. I did not come here to stand on ceremony. I came to find Amelia. She lived in my household for many months, and I care for her deeply. I need to know what has happened to her. Mrs. Blake resumed her seat, her face pale. She never told me she had lived in a duke's household. She only said she had come from the north, from a position that had ended badly. A position that had ended badly. James repeated the words slowly. Is that what she called it? That is what she told me, yes. She said she had been a housekeeper, but that circumstances had forced her to leave. She never said more than that. James felt a cold weight settle in his chest. She had not even told Mrs. Blake the truth about her time at Blackwood Hall. She had kept her secrets even from the woman she had trusted with her child. But then, he reflected, Perhaps that was exactly why she had kept them. The less Mrs. Blake knew, the safer she would be. Amelia had been protecting her as well as the child. "May I see the child?" he asked. "I would like to assure myself that she is well." Mrs. Blake nodded and led him into the next room, where Rose was sitting on the floor, arranging a collection of smooth stones into careful patterns. She looked up when they entered, and James saw a flicker of recognition in her dark eyes. "Good afternoon, Miss Rose," he said gently. "Do you remember me?" The child studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "You are the Duke," she said. Her voice was small but clear, with none of the shyness he might have expected. "Yes, I am a friend of Amelia's. I have come to help her." Rose's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Is she coming back?" The question was so simple, and yet it cut James to the bone. He did not know the answer. He could not promise the child something he could not guarantee. "I am going to find her," he said finally. "That is a promise." Rose looked at him for another long moment, then returned her attention to her stones. "She said she would come back too," she said quietly. But she didn't. James felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the child's obvious pain, but he could not find the words. What could he say? That he would bring Amelia back, no matter what it took. That he would not rest until she was safe. These were promises he meant with all his heart, but he could not know whether he would be able to keep them. He knelt beside the child and picked up one of the smooth stones. "May I help you with your pattern?" he asked. Rose considered for a moment, then nodded. Together, they arranged the stones in silence, and James felt something shift inside him. He had come to Bristol to find Amelia, but he had found something else as well, a child who needed him, and a responsibility that went far beyond anything he had expected. He would find Amelia, but first, he would make sure that Rose was safe, and that meant discovering the truth about the secret that had driven Amelia to flee. The investigation that followed was the most difficult of James's life. He remained in Bristol for several weeks, hiring men to search for any trace of Amelia and questioning anyone who might have seen her. The trail was faint, but not entirely cold. A woman matching her description had been seen at the coaching inn near the harbour, buying passage on a coach to London. Another sighting placed her in a small village outside Oxford, where she had stopped for a night before continuing south. It was the direction that puzzled James. He had assumed that Amelia would go north, back to Yorkshire, or perhaps to Scotland, where the terrain was wilder and a woman could disappear more easily. Instead, she was heading south, toward London, the most populous city in the country. It seemed the opposite of what a woman trying to hide would do. Unless, of course, she was not trying to hide. Unless she had decided to face whatever danger was pursuing her, to confront it directly rather than continue running. The thought filled James with dread. If Amelia had gone to London to face her enemies, then she might already be in danger. She might already be. He could not complete the thought. He would not allow himself to believe that she was dead. She was too strong, too determined, too full of life. Whatever danger she faced, she would find a way to survive. He had to believe that. In late September, a letter arrived from his steward at Blackwood Hall. It contained news that James had not expected. A man had come to the estate, asking questions about Amelia. He had claimed to be a relative of the late Mrs. Hartwell, the woman whose identity Amelia had taken, and he had been very interested in learning where she might have gone. James read the letter twice, then 3 times. A man asking questions. A man claiming to be a relative. A man who had arrived at Blackwood Hall just as James was searching for Amelia in Bristol. It was too much of a coincidence. James did not believe in coincidences. He wrote back to his steward immediately, instructing him to obtain as much information as possible about the man. His name, his description, where he was staying, and anything else he could learn. The steward's reply came several days later. The man called himself Mr. Whitmore, the same name, James noted with grim amusement, as his own butler, and he was a solicitor from London. He had claimed to be settling the estate of the late Mrs. Hartwell, and wished to speak with anyone who had known her. A solicitor, a man who dealt in legal matters, in wills and estates and inheritance. a man who had come all the way from London to ask questions about a dead woman whose identity had been stolen. James's mind began to work faster. What if the secret Amelia had been protecting was not about the child at all, but about the woman whose name she had taken? What if the real Amelia Hartwell had left behind something, an inheritance, a legal claim, a secret of her own, that someone in London was now trying to find? And what if the child was connected to that secret in some way? He sat in his room at the hotel in Bristol, staring at the letter, and felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift into place. He did not yet see the full picture, but he could sense its shape, could feel the outlines of a truth that was larger and more dangerous than anything he had imagined. He had come to Bristol looking for a woman he loved. He was beginning to understand that he might find much more than that. The next morning, he settled his account at the hotel and made arrangements to travel to London. The search for Amelia was no longer a matter of following a faint trail of sightings. It was now a matter of confronting the man who had come to Blackwood Hall, and of discovering what he knew about the real Amelia Hartwell. And if that confrontation revealed the truth James had been seeking, then he would finally understand why she had left him. The question was whether he would be able to find her before it was too late. London in autumn was a city of fog and smoke, of damp streets and crowded thoroughfares, of wealth and poverty jostling side by side in uneasy proximity. James took rooms at his townhouse in Mayfair, a property he rarely used, but which was maintained by a small staff throughout the year. The house felt cold and empty, but he was not there for comfort. He was there to find the truth. His first task was to locate the solicitor who had come to Blackwood Hall. The man had given his name as Mr. Whitmore, but James suspected that this too was false. A man asking questions about a stolen identity would hardly use his own name. Still, it was something to begin with. He hired an inquiry agent, a man named Mr. Fellows, who came recommended by James's London solicitor. Fellows was a small, wiry man, with a quick mind and a network of contacts throughout the city. He listened to James's description of the situation with careful attention, then nodded and said that he would see what he could discover. The report came back within a week. The man calling himself Whitmore was indeed a solicitor, but his real name was Edmund Cartwright, and he worked for a firm in Lincoln's Inn that specialized in estate disputes and inheritance claims. He had been employed by a client whose identity Fellows had not yet been able to discover, but the nature of the case was clear. It involved the estate of a woman named Amelia Hartwell, who had died some years earlier, and a claim that had recently been made against that estate. James listened to the report with growing unease. The real Amelia Hartwell had died, and someone was making a claim against her estate. The woman he had known as Amelia had taken the dead woman's name, and now a solicitor had been sent to Blackwood Hall to ask questions. The connection was obvious, but the implications were not. Why would someone making a claim against the real Amelia Hartwell's estate care about the woman who had taken her name? Unless, of course, the woman who had taken the name was the one making the claim, or unless she was connected to the estate in some way that James did not yet understand. He asked Fellows to continue the investigation, to discover the name of Cartwright's client and the nature of the claim. The answer, when it came, was more surprising than anything James had expected. The client was a man named Sir Robert Hartwell, the late Amelia Hartwell's brother-in-law. He claimed that the child known as Rose Hartwell was not the daughter of a deceased servant, as Amelia had told everyone, but the legitimate daughter of Sir Robert's late brother, Charles Hartwell, and his wife, a woman named Eleanor. According to Sir Robert, the child had been stolen from her family several years earlier, and he had been searching for her ever since. James sat in his study in Mayfair, the report spread out before him, and tried to make sense of what he was reading. Sir Robert claimed that Rose was his niece, the legitimate heir to a substantial fortune that had been held in trust since her father's death. He claimed that the woman calling herself Amelia Hartwell had stolen the child and taken her into hiding, denying the family their rightful heir. If the claim was true, then the woman James loved was a kidnapper. She had taken a child from her family and kept her hidden for years, moving from place to place to avoid detection. The child she claimed to love was not hers at all, but the stolen daughter of a wealthy family. But if the claim was false, if Sir Robert was lying or mistaken, or motivated by something other than concern for the child, then the truth might be far darker. James thought about the fear he had seen in Amelia's eyes, about the way she had watched the road from the nursery window, about the letter she had left behind, so carefully worded, so full of desperate pleading. The secret I carry is not mine to reveal, and if it were known, it would destroy more lives than my own. What if the secret was not that she had stolen the child, but that she had saved her? What if Sir Robert was not a grieving uncle seeking to reclaim his family, but something far more dangerous? James did not know the answers, but he knew where to find them. Sir Robert Hartwell had an address in London, a house in a respectable neighbourhood near Regent's Park. If James could speak with him, perhaps he could learn enough to judge the truth of his claims. But he would have to be careful. If Sir Robert was behind whatever had driven Amelia into hiding, then approaching him openly would only alert him to James's interest. And if Sir Robert was a dangerous man, then showing his hand too early could put both Amelia and Rose at risk. James decided to proceed cautiously. He would not approach Sir Robert directly. Instead, he would continue to gather information, to build a picture of the situation before making any move. He would find out everything he could about the Hartwell family, about the estate, about the child's true parentage. And he would continue to search for Amelia, because she was still out there somewhere, and she needed him, whether she knew it or not. The investigation into the Hartwell family began in earnest. Fellows was dispatched to the parish records, to the courts, to the offices of solicitors who had handled the family's affairs. What he found was a tangled web of secrets, debts, and betrayals that stretched back for years. Charles Hartwell had been a younger son, a man of modest means who had married for love rather than money. His wife, Eleanor, had been the daughter of a wealthy merchant, a connection that had brought some financial stability to the family, but had also created resentment among Charles's relatives. When Charles had died suddenly, followed within months by his wife, the question of what would happen to their young daughter had become urgent. The child, Rose, had been placed in the care of her mother's sister, a woman named Catherine. But Catherine had died as well, and the child had passed into the hands of a guardian, whose identity was not clearly recorded. According to Sir Robert's claim, the child had then been taken by a woman who had worked as a nurse in the household, a woman who had disappeared with the child and left no trace. James read this information with a growing sense of unease. The woman who had taken the child, according to Sir Robert, had given her name as Amelia Hartwell, but James knew that the woman he loved had taken that name only recently, after the real Amelia's death. The real Amelia had died 3 years ago, according to the letter. The child had disappeared around the same time. What if the real Amelia Hartwell had been the woman who took the child? What if she had died while hiding the child, and the woman James loved had taken over the responsibility, continuing the flight under the dead woman's name? It made a kind of sense. If the woman James loved had been connected to the real Amelia, perhaps as a friend or a fellow servant, she might have inherited the burden of protecting the child. She might have taken the dead woman's name as a way of honoring her, or as a way of hiding her own identity, or both. But that still did not explain why she had felt the need to protect the child from her own family, unless the family was not what it appeared to be, unless Sir Robert's claim was false, and the child was in danger from the very people who were now demanding her return. James thought about the fear he had seen in Amelia's eyes. He thought about the way she had flinched at the arrival of strangers. He thought about the letter, with its desperate plea for him not to search for her. And he began to understand. She was not running from the law. She was running from a man who wanted the child for reasons that had nothing to do with love or family. She was running from Sir Robert Hartwell, and she had been running from him for a long time, and now she had gone to London to face him, perhaps to negotiate, perhaps to fight, perhaps to sacrifice herself, so that the child could be free. The thought filled him with a cold, clear anger. Sir Robert had been pursuing her for years. He had driven her from her home, forced her to change her name, forced her to leave the child she loved with strangers. And now he was in London, and so was she, and the confrontation that had been building for years was about to happen. James knew what he had to do. He had to find Amelia before she reached Sir Robert. He had to warn her, to offer his help, to stand beside her in whatever battle was coming. But London was a vast city, and Amelia had been hiding for years, Finding her would not be easy, and time was running out. The search for Amelia in London was conducted in silence and shadows. James could not risk alerting Sir Robert to his presence, so he moved carefully, using fellows and his network of contacts to trace any sign of a woman matching Amelia's description. The city was full of women, with dark hair and grey eyes, and the task seemed impossible. But James had one advantage. He knew Amelia. He knew her habits, her preferences, the places she might go when she needed to disappear. He knew that she preferred quiet, out-of-the-way lodgings, that she avoided attention, that she had a deep and abiding distrust of anyone who seemed too interested in her affairs. He began his search in the neighborhoods where a woman of limited means might find respectable lodgings: Bloomsbury, Islington, Camden Town. He walked the streets himself, stopping in at lodging houses and shops, asking careful questions of landlords and neighbors. He was not specific in his inquiries, only that he was looking for a woman who had recently arrived in London, a woman who seemed anxious or afraid. It was slow, painstaking work, and for weeks it yielded nothing. November came, and the weather turned cold. The fog that rolled in from the river made the streets seem endless and unreal. James walked through them day after day, his hope beginning to fade. And then, in early December, a note arrived from Fellows. A woman matching Amelia's description had been seen in a small lodging house near the British Museum. She had been there for several weeks, keeping to herself, and she had recently been visited by a man who matched Sir Robert Hartwell's description. James read the note, with a mixture of hope and fear. If Sir Robert had found her, then the danger was immediate. He had to act quickly. He went to the lodging house that same afternoon. It was a narrow building on a quiet street, respectable, but shabby, with a faded sign and lace curtains in the windows. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, a woman answered. She was the landlady, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, and she regarded James with open suspicion. "I'm looking for a woman who has been staying here," James said. "A woman with dark hair and grey eyes. She may have given a false name. It is very important that I speak with her." The landlady's suspicion deepened. "I don't know anything about that," she said. "And even if I did, I wouldn't be telling strangers about my tenants." "I am not a stranger," James said, and he handed her his card. "I am the Duke of Ashworth. The woman I am looking for is in danger, and I have come to help her. Please, if you know where she is, tell me." The landlady stared at the card, her eyes widening. She looked from the card to James's face, and something in her expression shifted. "You're really a duke?" she said. "I am, and I swear to you, I mean the woman no harm. I only want to help her." The landlady hesitated for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stepped back from the door. "She's not here," she said quietly. "She left this morning, just after the gentleman came to call, but she told me she was going to a house near Regent's Park. She said she would be back by evening." Regent's Park. Sir Robert's address was near Regent's Park. James felt a chill run through him. Did she say anything else? Anything at all? "She said that if anything happened to her, I should send word to a woman in Bristol." "A Mrs. Blake?" The landlady paused, her face troubled. "She was very frightened, sir. I've never seen a woman so frightened. She kept looking at the door, as though she expected someone to come through it at any moment." James nodded, his mind already racing. Amelia had gone to Sir Robert's house. She had gone to face him, alone, and she was frightened. Whatever was about to happen, it was happening now, and James had to reach her before it was too late. He thanked the landlady and left, hailing a cab and giving the driver Sir Robert's address. The journey across London seemed to take forever, the cab lurching through the crowded streets, the fog closing in around them. James sat in the back, his hands clenched, willing the horse to move faster. When the cab finally stopped outside Sir Robert's house, James leaped out and ran to the door. It was a large, imposing house, the kind of place a wealthy man might keep in town, and James's heart sank as he took in the darkened windows and the heavy oak door. He knocked, and when there was no answer, he knocked again, harder. The door was opened by a servant, who looked at James with surprise. "Sir," the man said, "can I help you?" "I am the Duke of Ashworth," James said, his voice tight. "I have reason to believe that a woman I know is inside this house, and that she may be in danger. I demand to see Sir Robert, immediately." The servant hesitated, then stepped aside. "Please wait in the hall, Your Grace," he said. "I will inform Sir Robert of your arrival." James stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the hallway. The house was silent, too silent, and there was something about the atmosphere that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He waited, listening, and after a moment he heard voices coming from somewhere deeper in the house. One of them was raised in anger, the other was quieter, but he recognized it. Amelia. He did not wait for the servant to return. He strode down the hallway, following the sound of the voices, and threw open the door at the end. The scene that greeted him would stay with him for the rest of his life. Amelia stood with her back to the wall, her face pale, her hands raised as though to ward off a blow. Across from her stood a man James recognized from his description, Sir Robert Hartwell. He was older than James had expected, with grey hair and a hard, angular face, and he was advancing on Amelia with a look of cold fury. "You will give me the child," he was saying, "or I will see you hanged for what you have done. Do you understand me? I will destroy you, and everyone you care about, and I will take what is rightfully mine." "No," Amelia said, and though her voice trembled, there was a strength in it that made James's heart ache. "I will never give her to you. She is not yours. She will never be yours." Sir Robert's face contorted with rage. He raised his hand, and James saw that he meant to strike her. In that moment, something inside James snapped. He stepped forward, placing himself between Sir Robert and Amelia, and caught the man's wrist before the blow could fall. "Touch her," James said quietly, "and I will kill you where you stand." Sir Robert's eyes widened. He tried to pull his hand free, but James's grip was like iron. "Who the devil are you?" he demanded. "I am the Duke of Ashworth, and I am taking this woman out of here. If you try to stop me, I will make your life very, very difficult. Do I make myself clear?" Sir Robert stared at him, and for a long moment the two men stood locked in silence. Then, slowly, Sir Robert lowered his arm. "This is none of your affair," he said, his voice cold. "The woman is a kidnapper. She has stolen my brother's child, and I have every right to take her back." "The child is not yours," Amelia said from behind James. "She is not Sir Robert's niece. She is not Charles Hartwell's daughter." "She is." She broke off, and James turned to look at her. Her face was streaked with tears, and her whole body was trembling. "Amelia," he said gently, "tell me the truth. I need to know." Amelia looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the full weight of the secret she had been carrying. "Rose is my daughter," she said. "She is my daughter, and Sir Robert is her father. He forced himself upon me when I was a servant in his household, and when he learned that I was with child, he tried to have me killed. I escaped, and I have been running from him ever since." The words hung in the air like a confession torn from the very depths of her soul. James stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. Sir Robert was not her child's uncle, he was her child's father, and he had tried to have Amelia killed. It was monstrous. It was unthinkable. And yet, as James looked at the man standing before him, he saw the truth of it in the cold, calculating expression on Sir Robert's face. "You cannot prove any of this," Sir Robert said. "You have no witnesses, no evidence. It will be your word against mine, and who do you think the courts will believe? A runaway servant, or a respected member of the gentry?" "I believe her," James said quietly, "and I will stand with her, whatever comes." Sir Robert laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You are a fool," he said. "A fool and a romantic. Do you think your title will protect you? Do you think you can simply walk away from this? The child is mine by law, and I will have her." "The law," James said, "does not give a man the right to abuse and terrorize the mother of his child. And if you think I will stand by while you threaten her, you are very much mistaken." He turned to Amelia, taking her hand in his. "Come," he said. "We are leaving." She hesitated, her eyes darting to Sir Robert. "He will not stop," she said. "He will come after me. He will come after Rose." "Then we will be ready for him," James said. "But you do not have to face him alone. Not anymore." He led her out of the house, past the startled servant, and into the waiting cab. Amelia was silent for a long time, her hand still clasped in his, her face turned toward the window. James watched her, his mind churning with everything she had told him, and he felt a grief so profound that it threatened to swallow him. She had been carrying this burden alone for years. She had been fleeing from a man who had violated her, who had tried to destroy her, who was now trying to take her child. And she had never told anyone, never asked for help, never allowed herself to imagine that there might be a way out. "Amelia," he said softly, "why did you not tell me? I would have helped you. I would have protected you." She turned to look at him, and there was something broken in her eyes. "I could not tell you," she said. "I was ashamed, I was afraid, and I did not want to burden you with my past. I thought that if I left, I could protect you from the danger that follows me." "The danger does not follow you," James said. "It follows him, and I will not let him harm you again. Do you understand me? I will not let him touch you, or Rose, ever again." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, she began to weep. It was not a quiet, restrained crying, but a great, heaving sob that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. James wrapped his arms around her and held her close, feeling her body shake against his. "It's going to be all right," he whispered. "I promise you, it's going to be all right." The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. James took Amelia to his townhouse in Mayfair, where she could be safe, while they decided what to do next. He sent word to Mrs. Blake in Bristol, instructing her to bring Rose to London, and he hired additional servants to ensure that the house was well protected. Sir Robert made no immediate move, but James knew that the reprieve was only temporary. The man was too determined, too ruthless, to simply abandon his claim. He would find some way to pursue the child, and when he did, James would need to be ready. The first priority was to establish the legal truth of Rose's parentage. James contacted his solicitor, a man named Mr. Simmons who had handled the family's legal affairs for decades, and laid out the situation in careful detail. Simmons listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave as the story unfolded. "This is a serious matter," he said when James had finished. "If what you say is true, then Sir Robert has committed grave crimes. But proving those crimes will not be easy. There are no witnesses to the assault, no records of the child's birth, and Sir Robert is a man of considerable influence." "There must be something we can do," James said, "some way to establish the truth." Simmons considered for a moment. "We might begin by finding the people who knew Amelia when she worked in Sir Robert's household, servants, staff, anyone who might have seen something or heard rumors. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, it may lend weight to her account." "And the child? How do we prove that she is Amelia's daughter?" "Physical resemblance may help, though it is not legally conclusive. We might also search for any records of the child's birth, or for evidence that Amelia was pregnant while in Sir Robert's employ. If we can find the doctor or midwife who attended the birth, that would strengthen the case considerably." James nodded slowly. "Then we must begin immediately. I want every resource at our disposal devoted to this investigation. Money is no object." The investigation continued through the winter months. Fellows was dispatched to the estate where Amelia had worked, a large property in the countryside south of London, and began quietly asking questions among the servants and tenants. The results were mixed. Some of the staff remembered Amelia, who had worked there under a different name. Her real name, she told James, was Mary Turner. They remembered that she had been quiet and hard-working, and that she had left suddenly, without explanation. None of them remembered any impropriety on Sir Robert's part, but several mentioned that he had a reputation for cruelty toward the servants, and that women in particular were wary of him. The doctor who had attended the birth could not be found. The midwife had died the previous year. The parish records showed no entry for the child's baptism, which was not unusual for a servant's illegitimate child, but which made the case more difficult. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, James refused to give up. He had made a promise to Amelia, and he intended to keep it. He would find a way to protect her and Rose, no matter what it took. In January, the confrontation came. Sir Robert had hired his own solicitor, a man named Cartwright, and had filed a claim in the courts, seeking custody of the child on the grounds that she was his legitimate niece and the rightful heir to the Hartwell estate. The claim was accompanied by a sworn statement from Sir Robert, who asserted that the child had been stolen by a servant who had then disappeared, and that he had been searching for her for years. The claim was absurd, of course. Rose was not Sir Robert's niece. She was his daughter, the product of his assault on a servant in his own household. But proving that in a court of law would be difficult, and Sir Robert knew it. He was counting on the fact that a woman of Amelia's station would have little credibility against a man of his wealth and position. James's solicitor prepared a counterclaim, asserting Amelia's rights as the child's mother and alleging the truth about Sir Robert's conduct. But the case was complex, and the outcome uncertain. The courts in such matters often sided with the father, regardless of the circumstances, and Sir Robert's influence was considerable. As the weeks passed, Amelia grew increasingly anxious. She spent most of her time in the nursery with Rose, who had been brought to London and was now living in James's townhouse under the care of a nurse. The child seemed to sense that something was wrong, and she clung to her mother more than usual, her dark eyes watchful and wary. James did what he could to reassure them both, but he knew that words would not be enough. He needed to act, to find some way to neutralize Sir Robert's claim before it destroyed the life he and Amelia were trying to build. And then, in February, a breakthrough came. Fellows had been investigating Sir Robert's finances, looking for any weakness that could be exploited. What he found was startling. Sir Robert was deeply in debt. The estate he had inherited was mortgaged to the hilt, and he had been borrowing heavily to maintain his lifestyle. The reason for his sudden interest in his niece was now clear. The child was the heir to a substantial fortune, held in trust until she came of age. If Sir Robert could gain custody of her, he would also gain control of that fortune. The discovery changed everything. Sir Robert was not motivated by family feeling, or even by a desire to control the child. He was motivated by greed. He needed the money, and he saw Rose as a means to obtain it. James took this information to his solicitor, who immediately recognized its significance. If we can show that Sir Robert's claim is motivated by financial gain, it will undermine his credibility before the court, Simmons said. The judges are not blind to such things. A man who seeks custody of a child solely to gain control of her inheritance is not likely to be viewed favorably. But we still need to prove that Amelia is the child's mother, James said, and that Sir Robert is the father. Yes, Simmons agreed. But we may not need to prove it conclusively. If we can establish that Sir Robert's claim is based on lies, the court may dismiss it without ever reaching the question of the child's parentage. And if we can show that he has a history of cruelty and misconduct, that will further weaken his position. The strategy was sound, but it would require time and careful preparation. James threw himself into the work, spending long hours with Simmons and fellows, gathering evidence and preparing arguments. The legal proceedings moved slowly, as legal proceedings always did, and the weeks stretched into months. Through it all, Amelia remained at James's side, her quiet strength a constant source of inspiration. She testified before the court, telling her story in a calm, steady voice, though James could see the toll it took on her. She spoke of her time in Sir Robert's household, of the assault, of the pregnancy and the birth, of her flight and the years of hiding. The judges listened in silence, their faces unreadable. Sir Robert's testimony was a study in contrast. He was smooth and confident, dismissing Amelia's accusations as the ravings of a vengeful servant. He claimed that the child was his brother's daughter, that he had only ever wanted to see her return to her rightful family. When confronted with the evidence of his debts, he dismissed it as irrelevant, a distraction from the real issue. But the damage was done. The judges had seen the truth in the numbers, even if they could not say so openly. A man who was drowning in debt, who had suddenly discovered a wealthy niece he had never mentioned before, was not a man whose motives could easily be trusted. The case dragged on for months, through the spring and into the summer. There were delays and setbacks, moments when it seemed as though Sir Robert's influence would win the day, and moments when James felt a despair that threatened to overwhelm him. But he did not give up. He could not. Amelia and Rose were depending on him, and he would not fail them. Finally, in August, the court issued its ruling. Sir Robert's claim was dismissed. The judges found that his testimony was inconsistent, that his motives were suspect, and that there was insufficient evidence to establish that the child was his niece. They declined to rule on the question of the child's parentage, but they made it clear that they did not accept Sir Robert's account. It was not a complete victory. The court had not explicitly confirmed that Amelia was Rose's mother, or that Sir Robert was her father. But it was enough. Sir Robert's claim was dead, and without the authority of the court behind him, he had no legal basis to pursue the child. When James received the news, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not even realized he was carrying. He went immediately to the sitting room, where Amelia was waiting, and he took her hands in his. "It's over," he said. "Sir Robert's claim has been dismissed. He cannot touch you or Rose. You are safe." Amelia stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Are you certain?" she whispered. "Is it truly over?" "It is," James said. "The court has ruled in our favor. Sir Robert has no legal standing to pursue the child. You are free." For a long moment, Amelia did not speak. Then she began to cry, not with the wrenching sobs of before, but with quiet, grateful tears that slid down her cheeks and soaked into the fabric of her dress. James held her close, feeling her body shake with the release of years of fear and tension. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." "You have nothing to thank me for," James said. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Amelia said, pulling back to look at him. "Not anyone. You. You believed me when no one else would. You stood by me when it would have been easier to walk away. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left." James smiled, reaching up to brush the tears from her cheek. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you from the moment I first saw you standing in my garden, and I will love you for the rest of my life. Nothing you have told me, nothing that has happened, could ever change that." Amelia looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not only gratitude and relief, but something deeper, a love that mirrored his own, that had been waiting patiently for the chance to be spoken aloud. "I love you too," she said. "I have tried not to. I tried to leave, to forget, to build a new life, but I could not. You were always in my heart, even when I believed I would never see you again." James pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he would never let her go. The future stretched out before them, uncertain in many ways, but no longer shadowed by the fear that had defined Amelia's life for so long. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The wedding took place in the autumn, a small, private ceremony at the church near Blackwood Hall. Only a few guests attended, mostly James's family and closest friends, along with Mrs. Blake, who had travelled from Bristol to see the woman she had befriended become a duchess. Rose stood beside her mother, dressed in a pale blue gown that matched her eyes, and watched with solemn interest as the ceremony unfolded. James had not wanted a grand affair. He had already had one lavish wedding, years ago, and the memory of it was still tinged with sorrow. This time, he wanted something quieter, more intimate, a celebration of the quiet love he and Amelia had built together in the face of so much adversity. After the ceremony, they returned to Blackwood Hall, where a modest wedding breakfast had been prepared. The house, which had felt so empty during the months of Amelia's absence, now seemed full of light and laughter. Even the servants, who had been bewildered by the sudden changes in their master's life, seemed genuinely happy for the couple. As the afternoon wore on, James found himself standing on the terrace, watching the sun sink toward the moors. The sky was streaked with gold and pink, and a soft wind carried the scent of heather from the hills. He felt a peace that he had not known in years, a sense that the long, difficult journey of the past several years had finally brought him to a place of rest. Amelia came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. James turned to look at her, at the woman who had become the center of his world. "I was thinking about how different my life is now," he said. "Not so long ago, I was alone, grieving, convinced that I would never know happiness again. And now," he paused, struggling to find the words. "Now I have you. I have Rose. I have a family again." Amelia smiled, that small, sad smile that he had come to love. "I never thought I would have any of this," she said. "A home, a husband, a future. I thought I would spend my whole life running, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid. But you gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a reason to hope." James raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to run again," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it together, you and I, and Rose." They stood in silence for a long time, watching the sunset deepen into twilight. The first stars began to appear overhead, faint and distant, and the air grew cool with the approach of evening. It was a moment of perfect stillness, a pause between the struggles of the past and the uncertainties of the future. And then, from inside the house, came the sound of laughter, Rose's laughter, bright and clear, carrying through the open doors. James and Amelia turned together, drawn by the sound, and went back inside to join their daughter. The future was not without its challenges. Sir Robert, though defeated in court, remained a bitter and resentful man. There were moments when James wondered whether he might attempt some further mischief, some act of revenge against the woman who had defied him. But as the months passed, and then the years, it became clear that Sir Robert's power had been broken. His debts had caught up with him, his reputation was in ruins, and he had retreated into obscurity, a bitter old man with nothing left but his memories of a life that had crumbled around him. Amelia, now the Duchess of Ashworth, settled into her new life with a grace that surprised even herself. She had never expected to be a duchess, and the duties and responsibilities of her new position sometimes felt overwhelming. But James was patient, and the servants were kind, and slowly she began to find her footing. She learned to manage the household, to entertain guests, to navigate the complex social world of the aristocracy. She discovered that she was good at these things, that the skills she had developed during her years of hiding, the ability to read people, to anticipate danger, to keep secrets, served her well in the drawing rooms and ballrooms of high society. Rose flourished in her new life. The shy, watchful child who had spent her early years in hiding began to blossom into a confident, curious girl. She loved the moors, loved the freedom of running through the heather and exploring the streams and hollows of the estate. She made friends among the children of the neighboring gentry, and she excelled at her lessons, showing a quick mind and a love of reading that delighted her mother. But she never forgot where she had come from. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, she would ask Amelia about the old days, about the rooms they had shared and the places they had hidden. Amelia would answer carefully, honestly but gently, and Rose would listen with those dark, serious eyes that seemed to hold so much more than a child's understanding. James watched them together, mother and daughter, and felt a love so profound that it sometimes took his breath away. He had lost one family, had grieved them for years, had believed that he would never know such love again. And then Amelia had walked into his life, and everything had changed. He did not know what the future held. No one did. But he knew that whatever came, he would face it with the woman he loved and the child they were raising together. He would protect them, cherish them, and spend every day of his life trying to deserve the happiness they had given him. The Duke of Ashworth had been given a second chance at love, and he did not intend to waste it. In the years that followed, the story of the Duke and his Duchess became something of a legend among the families of the North. People whispered about the mysterious woman who had come to Blackwood Hall under a false name, about the child she had protected, about the powerful man who had tried to destroy them, and the Duke who had stood against him. The details varied from telling to telling, and the truth was often embellished beyond recognition, but the heart of the story remained the same: a woman who had lost everything, a man who had given her back her hope, and the love that had carried them through the darkest of times. Amelia sometimes heard these stories, and she would smile quietly, shaking her head at the more fanciful embellishments. But she did not correct them. The truth was hers to keep now, a private treasure that she shared only with James and, eventually, with Rose. The rest of the world could believe whatever it wished. What mattered was that they were together. They had faced the worst and survived. They had built a new life out of the ruins of the old, and they had done it together. And on the evenings when James came home from a day of estate business, when he found Amelia in the library with a book in her lap, and Rose playing at her feet, he would pause in the doorway and simply look at them, feeling a gratitude that went beyond words. This was his family, this was his life, and he would not trade it for anything in the world. She had vanished before he could propose, and he had spent months searching for her, consumed by fear and uncertainty. But in the end, she had not vanished at all. She had been waiting for him all along, waiting for him to find her, to believe her, to love her enough to stand against the world. And he had. The letter that had changed everything lay in a drawer in his study, its edges worn from frequent reading. James no longer needed to read it. The words were burned into his memory. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would take it out and hold it, remembering the morning it had arrived, remembering the cold dread that had filled him as he read her words. I remain, always and forever, your loving Amelia. She had signed it with a name that was not her own, but the sentiment had been true. She was his, and he was hers, and the love she had declared in that letter had proven stronger than any secret, any danger, any force that had tried to tear them apart. And that, James thought, as he watched his wife smile at their daughter across the room, was the greatest truth of all. Love was not something that could be hidden or stolen or destroyed. It was something that endured, even in the darkest of times, even when all hope seemed lost. It was the one thing that could not be taken, because it lived not in the body but in the heart, and the heart was a fortress that no enemy could breach. Amelia had taught him that. She had taught him that love was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth believing in even when the world insisted it was impossible. And as he crossed the room to join his wife and daughter, as he knelt beside them and pulled them both into his arms, he knew that he would spend the rest of his life proving that she was right. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the wind whispered across the moors, and somewhere in the darkness, the world went on as it always had. But inside Blackwood Hall, there was warmth and light and laughter, and the quiet certainty that no matter what came, they would face it together. The Duke of Ashworth had found his Duchess, and he would never let her go. Do you think Amelia was right to run away and leave the Duke behind, even though she loved him? Was protecting the child and keeping her secret worth breaking his heart? And what about the Duke? Would you have forgiven him so easily if you were in Amelia's shoes, after he spent months hunting her down? Or did his determination to find her only prove how much he truly loved her? I want to read every single one of your thoughts down below. If you believe in a love that fights through the darkness, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story from the world of dukes, duchesses, and forbidden romances. And before you go, imagine this. One day, Rose is grown, a beautiful and wealthy young heiress. A stranger arrives at Blackwood Hall, carrying a letter addressed to her mother. A letter written in the hand of Sir Robert Hartwell. What do you think that letter says? Let me know your theories in the comments. Because sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried forever. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep believing in a love that survives everything.